Hi, I'm going to be talking about considerations for EEL evaluation. What's the difference? I'm going to be talking about the difference between dialect and language disorder. So before we get into the questions, we're going to talk about dialect for a minute. Dialect is a variation or a difference in the articulation of words. It's usually regional or associated with people or a culture, and it usually encompasses a large group of people. For example, African American, Hispanic, Asian English. I do have some dialect examples. I use African American English. Their dialect sometimes can delete the past tense of S. It can change the verb. It can change the pronoun. So some examples might be, and then he fixed the food, or he tired from the long day. They was hungry for food, then is on their way home. Language disorder. People who struggle with language disorder have trouble getting their meaning or message across to others, or they have struggle with expressive language, or they have trouble understanding the message coming from others, which is receptive language. Some examples might be in the area of fluency. They might be stuttering with articulation. It could be omitting or substituting words, or voice. They might have abnormal changes in their voice fluctuation. People who struggle with language disorder might have trouble learning new words, answering questions, following directions, expressing their thoughts and ideas, or using words correctly. And it usually encompasses a small group of people. Question number 1. Students sometimes speak with dialects or differences in language that are related to their culture. What is your professional opinion on how these differences impact assessment approaches in oral language? One of my answers to that is professionals can assume that all students from diverse groups are normal dialect speakers and thus fail to assess their language competence. So in other words, when professionals assume that all students from a diverse group, such as Spanish-speaking students, the Hispanic community, they might assume that they're all speaking normal dialect, which means that they can miss the signs of a language disorder, and so they don't assess. If students are assessed, professionals can overcompensate for dialect and assume that true disorders are dialectical characteristics. I hope I said that right. So in other words, when students are assessed, the professional can confuse those who have true language disorders with just having dialects. Professionals can overcompensate for dialect and mistake dialectical differences for language disorders. So students who have dialects can sometimes be mistaken for having a language disorder because the professional assessing them can't differentiate between the two. And I did find this quote that I thought was good. It is the position of the American Speech Language Hearing Association that no dialectical variety of American English is a disorder or a pathological form of speech or language. So in other words, dialects don't reflect a language disorder. Question number 2. What intervention options are available to students who are English learners if they need additional services? And here were a few intervention options the teacher should consider. How to better present information include class participation orally. Students should have an opportunity to have discussions with peers and practice oral language skills, and changing the classroom environment to enhance peer interaction and listening skills. So the teacher should consider how to better present information and include class participation orally. So I put that one of the expectations is for students to be able to participate in their classroom orally with their students, with other students, with their teacher. They should be able to read and understand their curriculum and be more fluent of the class language in the classroom. And some expectations of the teacher should be how to make sure each student understands what's being taught and what's being expected of them. So I feel like a teacher's responsibility should be to communicate clearly to their students so they can understand the information. And some interventions for teachers to include with their ELL students might be physical gestures, like giving them a thumbs up or eye contact or pointing. It's also important that teachers be really organized with those students, that they present the information in an organized manner so the student can easily follow along. And pace is really important. The teacher should slow down when they're talking to a student so they can have a chance to catch up, especially if it's a student who is mentally translating while they're listening. Give students a break. It can be mentally and emotionally taxing to try to learn another language, but also pay attention to what the teacher is saying. And students really might need a break throughout, maybe even several breaks throughout the day, just to kind of like collect themselves and just give their brains a break for a little bit. And another intervention could be to give the students a chance to speak out loud, such as when responding to questions or giving comments. So instead of the teacher just standing up at the front and just lecturing, the teacher should maybe modify the format of a lesson to include a lot of questions in there to give students an opportunity to use their voice. And teachers should use positive statements when correcting their students' mistakes and model standard English usage. Students should have the opportunity to have discussions with peers and practice oral language skills. So whole class participation, like I said earlier, teachers should try moving away from just standing in front of the classroom and just lecturing the whole time while the students just sit back and listen. They should try to include class participation in lessons. And encourage students to answer questions that are more than just a yes or no type of answer. And with centers and groups, you can really do a lot with groups. You could do small group discussions, learning centers, role-playing activities, partners, class meetings. But it's important that the teacher make sure that they are noticing that the ELL student is participating in the discussions and communicating with their peers around them. Changing the classroom environment to enhance peer interaction and listening skills. So I have seating arrangements and atmosphere. Changing the desk arrangement can really make a huge impact on encouraging communication between students. Typically, a lot of classrooms have all the individual desks in a row, and it's just not really conducive to encourage students to have interaction with one another. So sometimes switching to big tables, like I have in this picture right here, so several students can be sitting around the table, can really increase that interaction. And it can give those ELL students a chance to practice expressive language like words and gestures and signs and symbols, and they can see that in their peers around them too. And one thing the textbook suggested was to find ways to decrease the volume of the classroom so students can participate in listening skills without all the extra noise. And one thing they suggested was carpet in the classroom to kind of muffle all that extra noise that can happen, or have a listening center where a student can go and maybe it's just a quiet spot in the room where there's away from a lot of the noise and moving around. They could even have headphones in there and listen, just a place for them to have some quiet to kind of collect themselves again. Question number 3, why are students who are culturally and linguistically diverse sometimes are over or under identified for special education services? I put professionals are not properly trained. That might be one of the reasons, or insufficient or inadequate assessments. for professionals who are not properly trained. Professionals, a problem might be professionals aren't trained to distinguish between students who have culturally and linguistically diverse characteristics with those of actual disorders, such as a language disorder. So they might not be able to differentiate between the two, which can cause issues when you're trying to assess if someone should be in special education or not in special education. And another problem might be is professionals who don't look at the classroom environment and assess whether their minority students need extra support during learning before a special education referral. So in other words, it's, you might not have a minority ELL student in the classroom who needs extra help, but that teacher or professional hasn't provided any interventions, or they haven't monitored their students' progress very accurately. And insufficient or inadequate assessments. Assessments can be an issue when trying to decide if a child should be in special education or not. Oftentimes, the assessments are not assessed in the student's home language during evaluation for special education. And oftentimes the assessments are culturally biased to those who don't speak English standard. And some might even say that is discriminatory. Like for instance, when it comes to norm reference standardized tests, they're not always represented of those minorities or linguistic backgrounds. Thank you.